Hey, friend, welcome to another episode of the Between Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Matson, and I'm so deeply grateful to have you listening in today. In this episode, we will be poets together. We will endeavor to delight in the heartbreaking cacophony of language. We will speak the unspeakable with words we didn't know we owned. We will polish our phrases with the tears we've spent too long collecting. We will rhyme or not, because words are just meager wisps of truth anyway. We will be poets together, and in our poems, we might hear God smile. Allen Ginsberg once wrote this: poetry is not an expression of the party line. It's that time of night, lying in bed, thinking what you really think, making the private world public. That's what the poet does. Today's guest here on the Between Podcast has done something truly wonderful. She has invited us into her private world through a new book of poetry that explores bent but not broken faith, identity, power structures, loss and love and wonder. Let me introduce Grace, and maybe we can have her share some of her newest poetry at some point during this conversation. And maybe she'll allow me to invite her into a conversation about the power of poetry to help us connect with one another in sacred ways. Grace E. Kelley is a follower of Jesus, a wife, and a mother of 5, including a set of boy-girl twins. She graduated from Colorado State University with a bachelor's in creative writing and a double emphasis in poetry and creative nonfiction. She writes poetry and stories, both fictional and nonfictional, and occasionally enjoys the opportunity to be a speaker. She is also a farmer, a foodie, an unrepentant mug addict. This is her bio that says an unrepentant mug addict, and a deep believer that incredible beauty can come from the compost heap. Among her writing credits, you can find her debut poetry collection titled As the Sparrow Flies, and her newest collection that is soon to be released. We'll be talking about it a lot today. And in fact, it might be, I think it comes out this spring, right? Good job, Grace. For those of you watching this, Grace is doing some solid promo work right there. She's doing great work. But yeah, that was As the Sparrow Flies. The new book is called Daughter of Breath. Grace, thank you so much for joining us. I feel like we should probably start with you being an unrepentant mug addict. You were taking a sip of tea from a beautiful little piece of china mug right there. Will you tell us about your mugs? Do you collect mugs? What's your deal?
Well, so actually I was like, oh, I better be prepared to show my mug for anyone who's actually watching. But this is one that's like a teapot on a mug, which is kind of fun. But yeah, my mug addiction is mostly just I love hot drinks all the time. So I don't know if I would say I'm really a collector so much as I will find the perfect mug and I will want to buy it. And I have to limit myself because my cabinet is only so big. So, but mostly right now, most of the time I'm using mugs that my friends make because I'm at the farmer's market and there's all sorts of other makers there. And I've made friends with one of the potters. Her name is Tony, and she is just incredible. All of her ceramics are just art, but they're also useful, which I just love, that useful and beautiful. So, yeah, I love the hand-thrown things right now. That's my favorite.
I guess farmers markets are, especially if you're someone who works at a farmers market or is there a lot, I gotta believe that's like a place where you will engage in real meaningful connection with people. Like I don't, there's something. What is the vibe of a farmer's market? Do you know? Like there's something special about the pace of a farmer's market. The expectation of engagement. I don't know what it is, but I really like farmers markets.
Yes, no, it's fantastic. I feel like I just go and I get to see all my friends when I go and all season long, which is so fun. And I mean, they're all friends I've made there. I mean, I think some markets are better than others, but the one that we attend is makers only, makers and growers only. So it's not like anybody's selling windows or anything like random. You know what I mean? There's no like resale things. It's all people that are making or growing the thing. So it's all just a huge group of people that are super passionate about whatever it is that they do, and they're willing to give up their weekend for it. So it takes a special kind of person to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a lot of kindred spirits there for sure.
I assume
Yeah.
you sell things from your farm there. You don't sell your poetry
Yes.
there. Maybe you do. I don't know.
Well, actually, I try. I have my book like at the checkout, and sometimes I'll try to say something cheesy like, "Oh, would you like to wash your lettuce with some tears today? Here's my book of poems about grief," or something dumb like that. And sometimes it works. Well, every once in a while.
If there's an audience that's going to go for that, it's people at the Makers and Growers farmers market, right? Like,
right? I know. Yeah, it's funny.
All right, so let's dive in, and we're going to dive in head first, if that's okay. But I mean, there's a lot I want to talk to you about. We'll get into your poetry. Maybe we'll talk about poetry in general. There's a lot of things we could explore, but I wonder if you'd be okay sharing a little bit about your faith journey. I know that can be a tricky prompt for some people, but obviously our community Between is all about the intersection of faith and human connection. And in your poetry, I've read your newest book. Thanks so much for the advanced copy. Like, that was wow. We'll talk about it in a minute. But yeah,
we'll get to it.
But that poetry certainly, you reveal some of your faith story and maybe some of the complexity of the way faith has been a part of your life. Would you be okay sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, I mean, in broad strokes, I was raised in the church, which I think, there were probably a lot of positives and negatives, just because of, a lot of the things I talk about in my book, just honestly, a lot of the corruption that has existed in church spaces and a lot of the harm that has been caused by abusive spaces, or just spaces that even just didn't have a theology of an expansive God who actually does welcome everybody. So yeah, I grew up in the church, but even from a very young age, had a lot of trauma because I was sexually abused in a church context, and the church I was in did not handle that the right way. Thank God my parents were amazing, and they were like, "Okay, we're leaving, peace out." But, yeah, they wanted us to just brush it under the rug. And, we didn't do that. So we left, and we lost all our friends and all that. So that was hard. But what's cool to me is even through that, despite the fact that the church was so hurtful, in ways that I am still unpacking, honestly, Jesus was still very real to me. So, I have this really distinct memory of being like 8 years old, which is how old I was when that all happened, and just sitting in my room crying and thinking like, oh, like God still cares about me. And I think I read, which this is a verse that's very triggering for some people, so just to keep that in mind, but I read Romans 8:28, I just happened to open to it. And, the context of that verse to me is so beautiful because it's not a happy-go-lucky verse, actually. It's very like, their life is really hard, and it's full of a lot of really painful realities, and yet we will be conformed into the image of Christ's Son, or of God's Son, Christ. And it will be for good in some way, right? And that good is like a very challenging good, because the good that Jesus experienced was intense suffering. And so there's some sort of mysterious good that is beyond that is above that exists from the compost heap of that. That's why I had that in my bio. And I think that was the first moment that reality, I don't want to call it an alternate reality, but sometimes that's kind of how I think of it, of like, there's another story, you know what I mean? There's another story happening where all the things that just look like garbage to me are not only that. There's something else. There's a regeneration. There's a growth. There's a beauty that can emerge. Not that those things aren't hard and bad and sad and even evil, but that God somehow can do an alchemy with it. And that reality started to dawn on me, even at that young age, reading that verse, which I know that verse has been used in such a way to harm so many people, so I'm even hesitant to share it. But I think that God really kind of took hold of me at that time and comforted me with that. So throughout my faith journey, and we were in and out of so many different churches over the years after that. And then as an adult, we got really connected to a church that seemed like a real community place. And I don't want to go into it too much. There was a lot of good that happened there too. But there was also a lot of harm that happened, and we were there for a decade. And then just we moved away 3.5 years ago. And so we were not going there anymore because we moved away. And through that process, we've kind of been in like a wilderness deconstruction, I guess, season, where God has really just revealed himself even more and has really liberated me from a lot of the theologies that were keeping me trapped, honestly. So yeah, that's the short version. That still feels like a long story, but that's the short version of my faith story.
That is, there's a lot packed into, not a long story, actually, a short bit. And that is so, I don't know the right word to use. That is so, complicated. There's so much upside downness packed into what you shared. A theology, you just expressed a theology of beauty from the compost heap, like that can be true at the same time. And there's no approval of the evil. There is recognition of the mess that life is. And I hear from you. I hope it's okay if I'm just saying this back. I hear from you like this prayer for those things never to be real again, and a recognition that they are, and all of that being true all at the same time. And oh my gosh, Grace, that was there's a lot in that, and I'm with you in this moment, and I'm grateful for you sharing that here. I think.
Oh, thank you.
Maybe this is why. Maybe this is why your poetry is so visceral and so beautiful, and also so heavy. All of those things show up in this book. I wonder. We'll get to your poetry specifically in a moment, but can we talk about poetry in general for a second? Because I think it.
Yeah.
Here's my truth. I kind of want to write poetry. I kind of want to feel like a poet sometimes. And I never gave myself permission to do that for almost all of my life. And I'm not trained. I'm not, approved. Nobody's ever told me I'm a poet. So,
you don't have to be a poet.
Maybe that's my question that's my question. Here's what I think. I think poetry is this this way to, express things that are unexpressible in normal conversation, express things that are
right.
Something like beyond what my normal words and my normal way of speaking can do. And it feels like poetry is for like a special club of poets sometimes. And so I think I'm asking you this question. What does it take to be a poet? Is there, should everybody feel permission? How does one get started? Like, teach us about poetry.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Okay. Well, I will say, first of all, the imposter syndrome is there because of the fact that some poets are very snobby about their poetry. And ask me how I know. I have been told in my college days, I was told that I should just quit and go work for Hallmark, which was a very big diss. Yeah. Okay. If you were in the poetry sector, that was a diss. Okay. So it took me years to even start sharing my poetry on the internet because I was like, well, it's garbage. Nobody actually wants this. Like, I didn't think that anybody wanted it. And it was like, because it was for me, and there are different aesthetics about poetry, and that's totally fine. Some people write poems that are very experimental, that are very like, you feel like you would have to really study it for a long time to understand what it's about. And that's fine. That's good. There's a place for that. There's also a place for what I would call, I don't know that I'm making this phrase up, somebody probably already coined it, but I would say accessible poetry. Poetry that is more able to be accessed by maybe an average reader, a typical reader, someone who doesn't think they like poetry. And to me, once I realized, okay, well, who am I writing my poems for? I'm not writing them so that other poets will be like, wow, she's an amazing poet. Like, that's not why. And of course, in college, that's what I was thinking, right? So I was like, well, they don't like it, so obviously it's garbage. No, I wasn't writing it for them. I was writing it for people who think they don't like poetry, because poetry is, like you said, it is a way to get at certain feelings, certain topics, certain contradictions in ways that sometimes it's really hard to get at in prose. And that's for everybody. That is not a club. It shouldn't be exclusive. I think if you want to write a poem, you're a poet. Just do it. Just write it. I mean, it doesn't have to even be good. You don't have to show it to anybody. And what is good anyway? I mean, by many people's standards, my poems are not good. They don't even rhyme most of the time. So there's that. Like, I don't usually have like a scheme, but like but there's a way in which, obviously, it, like you said, it does it does more than prose. It has to work harder. Every single word has to work really hard in poetry. So what does it take to be a poet? I would say it takes courage and paying attention are the two things that I would say. Because, I mean, for me, there is a quote from, I'm going to forget the name. And I don't want to quote it if I can't remember. There's a poet who said a poem. Oh, yeah. It's Robert Frost. Said a poem begins as a lump in the throat. And I love that. Because it's like, it's this depth of emotion that is, just needing to be expressed. A lot of times it's staring a really painful reality directly in the face. So you have to have courage for that. You have to have a lot of courage for that. And then just paying attention, like what are the ways in which the world around me is connecting to my inner life? What are the ways in which the world around me is teaching me something about my inner life? How is my own inner life helping me see the world in a good way or in a bad way? Like, what is my own internal reality contributing to my lens of the world, and is that good or bad? I mean, there's so many things you can explore with it, but yeah, those are the things I'd say: courage and paying attention.
I love that you said courage. This book of poetry that is about to come out must have taken, as an observer, as a third party, as a reader, must have taken incredible amounts of courage to put. I mean, some of the poems are like, okay, yeah, that's beautiful, and this is that. There's meaning in that, and then you'll turn a page and it's like, whoa, like that was that was real, like that got
yeah.
And I say that with as like complete flattery. Like I'm saying that because I would be terrified to put some of those things. If I carry anything even close to similar in my life, in my inner life, I would be terrified to put it on paper. And I think I just want to acknowledge that, mostly because I think if we're here talking about the sacredness of human connection, there is something deeply sacred, deeply holy about having the courage to put deep, deep inner truths on paper for other people to experience and to relate to and to consider for themselves. Right. How, maybe can I ask what gives you that courage?
Oh God. I don't even know. I mean, God, maybe that was the answer right there. Oh God. It is what gives me the courage. Okay, I'm going to try to not cry while I say this. I am a crier, so it's likely I will cry at some point on this podcast. I think for me, it's the one reader. It's the love of the one reader. Because like you said, it is terrifying. And especially with this upcoming book, I am already experiencing pushback. I expect to be experiencing a lot more pushback in the future. But I am writing it for that one reader who says to me, for the first time, now I really believe that God loves me as a queer Christian or whatever. And I'm just like, okay, that's it. That's the reason. Like, because God cares so much about that one reader, that one person. I want to love them like he loves them. And for me, my vocation is to put those things on paper, to put the unsayable on paper, to put my own vulnerabilities and my own struggles and my own wrestling on paper, because I am not the only one. I am one of thousands, I'm sure, who have experienced similar things, and even people who haven't experienced all the things I've experienced, they overlap in some other way. They resonate with a different part of the work. And God cares so much about them. So it's the love of the one reader that gives me the courage.
Okay, so let's dive into your work, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Obviously, Daughter of Breath. I loved it. I've made that clear. I'll make it clear again. It is gorgeous.
Thank you.
It is vulnerable. Obviously, it's insightful. It's surprising. I found myself like, I made more facial expressions while reading this, on my Kindle at night, than I ever make with reading anything. I really caught myself like dropping my jaw or like my eyes got really big and like what there were moments of real awe for me in reading this. Mm-hmm. Here's how I saw, you probably wrote this, but here's how I saw this book described on a website. Daughter of Breath is a timely voice calling those lost in the wilderness created by church-sponsored patriarchy, misogyny, and queerphobia to grieve, heal, and reclaim their authentic voices, born from the ache of deeply personal yet all too common experiences. And then it goes on. It includes poems on topics such as sexual abuse, medical gaslighting, generational trauma, wrestling with a queer identity, Christian patriarchy, deconstruction, female friendship, vocation, and contemplative spiritual practices. Maybe the right question to ask, Grace, is for you to just tell us the story of this collection. You've started to, certainly we've dove into that a little bit, but how did this come to be? I'm actually kind of curious, practically, are these individual pieces? Did you see this as a collection? Did you write this as a collection? Or were some of these, pulled out of a shoebox that you had written years ago? I'm really curious how this works, and maybe tell us the story of how it came together.
Sure. I'd love to. It's interesting finding my own, like, the way my work works and kind of the way that it comes to me. Most of this collection was actually written this last year, in this notebook that I bought at the bookstore where I had my book event for this book, for As the Sparrow Flies. I'm shocked. I cannot believe that I've produced so much work this year after having just launched another book and running a different business. I don't understand how people are always like, how do you, and I'm like, I don't know. They're there. Most of the poems were written this year. There were a few that had been previously published in other collections, not my own collections, but like magazines and things. And there were a few that had been in a shoebox, but most of them were new. And I literally remember the day I had the idea for the book. And I had the idea for the title of the book first. I was standing in the kitchen and I was talking to my husband and I was like, I think I'm going to write a book pushing back on patriarchy. And he was like, okay, set the scene. My husband is an Enneagram 9, peacemaker personality, who married an Enneagram 2, who was very, okay with being a peacemaker until more recently when I started just stirring the pot all the time. So God bless this man. But he's like, are you just trying to like make people mad? Like, what is your plan here? And I told him, which this is the opening poem for the book, but I was like, no, I just want to set women free. And now I've expanded that to not just include women, but when I had my little invitation poem at the beginning of the book, but I'm like, it's not about making someone else mad. It will make people mad, but that's not what it's about. It's about setting free. And the reality is that if you are benefiting from someone's oppression, you're not going to want them to be free. And it's going to make you mad that they're free. And also, on the other side, if you are also in a oppressed state, sometimes other people's freedom will be really irritating to you as well. So that's something I've come bumped up against quite a lot in the last few months since I came out as a bisexual on the internet. So that's been fun. So yeah, that's this book. And I was like, okay, so it's going to be a feminist collection. And then in May of this year, I realized that I couldn't just, I had come out to my husband as bisexual, November of last year of 2023. So it's whatever, it just became 2025. Yeah. So I'm still in 2024 in my head. And I thought at the time, I'll just tell him, like, I don't need to like come out. But then in May, I was like, no, I'm going to come out. So then God was like, hey, how about putting some coming out poems in this book? And I was like, God, are you crazy? Like, I'm already writing a book of feminist Christian poetry. Like, what are you trying to do? Like, the target's already big enough. Like, like, this is a bad idea. But he was just like, no. That's what's in this book. And I was like, okay. So it's very, I don't know, collaborative between me and God, obviously. Very, he tells me what things should be in there. And I'm like, okay, all right, let's do it. So that's the book. That's the work.
Well,
that's what came to be.
My favorite thing to do anytime I get to is to ask people to share their own work. And I wondered if you would mind maybe reading. Let's start with one piece, and I think there's a single poem in the book that shares the title of the book, "Daughter of Breath." Would you be okay reading that to us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Perhaps you have forgotten what it is to be as shining as those 100 billion stars in our galaxy. I don't blame you. The world has a way of smothering all that brightness, which is not its own, with a weighty dark, the slightest sliver of a glow they call conceit, as though it were for ourselves alone that we attempt to shine, as though the shining of 100 billion spheres was not a music meant for heaven's ears, as though our voices too weren't meant to carry, like the radio waves, into the farthest reaches of outer space, as though our bodies do not house the holiness that is the very breath of the divine. I've heard enough of little boys crying wolf at the shadow of a tree waving gracefully amongst moonbeams to be afraid myself, I will admit, but no longer. For I am a daughter of breath, and fear is not my birthright, joy is. And my breath is meant for singing, and my hips are made for dancing, and if your skin too glows by moonlight, and if they catch you swaying with the trees, I hope you'll join me in proclaiming once and for all that you are not the wolf they claim to fear, but a breath-made woman. Each inhale and exhale, the holiest name. Daughter of Breath.
Oh, Grace. Fear is not my birthright, joy is. Was that line of the... a poem written from the perspective of a woman, about women, but not just. And that poem speaks. That poem speaks to me. I'll just use I language.
Good. I'm glad. Good.
ensorcelled by that piece. Will you talk about maybe that piece? You said you came up with the title of the book first. I think. What
Mm-hmm.
was this an
Yeah.
early was this an early poem that you had produced for it, or tell us more about it?
I'm trying to remember. I think it was pretty early in the process. I don't remember exactly when I wrote this one. Um, but I talk about how the boy's crying
Mm-hmm.
wolf, is like one of the metaphors in the poem. Um, and for me, that was kind of just the metaphor that encapsulated, whatever. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, I'm an English major. I don't remember words. Uh, it encapsulates the angst and the fear that so many men, maybe not only
Mm-hmm.
men, but men who have been in patriarchal faith structures have
Mm-hmm.
expressed about women in leadership, about women even saying anything about literally anything. And so it kind of shares the story of how I began to see that those were just shadows of something beautiful, like a tree dancing in the moonlight. It's not actually something to
Mm-hmm.
be afraid of. There's actually a beauty and a sacredness there. Um, and so it was just kind of me saying, okay, yeah, I've also watched them cry wolf and been like, oh no, got to stay away from that, you know, because I was in a very conservative environment for a long time, and I 100% bought into it. Uh, so this book does not come from I've always been egalitarian, and why would anyone
Mm-hmm.
not be perspective. It comes from I 100% had bought into this whole patriarchal structure of church and thought that that was what God wanted. And then by God's grace, He has led me out of that and shown me, the beauty and the mystery there that comes, I think, when you listen to female voices about God. I mean, we have different
Yeah.
things to say. We have different observations. There's things in the Bible that connect with us in a different way, that we have wisdom to share, actually. And maybe men should listen to that. I don't know. Wild
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah. Um, I am like obsessed with uncertainty. I revel in uncertainty. I've talked about uncertainty and
Mm,
curiosity as cornerstones of my own current faith understanding, and your ability to circle the beauty and the sacredness of uncertainty is just striking. The idea that this fear, these things that we may fear might just be
right.
shadows of trees dancing in the moonlight. That is such
Yeah.
a that is that is an image that it will just burn itself on the front of my brain. I think in the most powerful
Mm,
way. Like,
mm-hmm.
wait, before I choose to submit to the fear being induced by that thing out there, that person over there,
Right.
that thing that is the other, the thing that is scaring
Mm,
everybody around
mm-hmm.
me. Study it closely. Make sure that it's not just the shadow of a tree dancing in the moonlight. Like that is a grace that but that shows up in everything that you write, and in um,
Mm,
it's so for me that is so re-enchanting of how you've re-enchanted darkness in a way that
mm,
doesn't give darkness light. You just show us that it's just because it's dark doesn't it's going to be there. And so get
right.
familiar with it, right? There is something
Right.
just so powerful
Yeah.
about that, Grace.
Like it's misunderstood
Yeah.
darkness.
Yeah.
And there's a sacredness to the darkness and to the unknown, like you were saying. I was that little girl and young woman who wanted everything
Mhm.
black and white. I wanted the answers. I wanted to know I was doing it right and why I was doing it, and everything had to be this. And there was this, and I don't know that I could say exactly where this came from, if it was religious upbringing or just my own self, but there was so much terror in me for so long about not knowing and not
Yeah.
having the right answer. And I just like want to hold that version of myself and just be like, it's
Mhm.
okay to not know. Like there's beauty and mystery, and there are all kinds of things that I'm not going to know until I meet God face to face. Um, and I no longer fear that as like oh, he's going to be like, well, let me tell you all the
Right.
things you got wrong. Like I don't think that's going to be that way. I'm sure he will tell me things I've gotten wrong, and it will be like a liberation. I'll be like, oh, I was wrong about that.
Mhm.
Okay. You know what I mean? It'll be like a beautiful, like joyful moment. It won't be like a shameful moment. Um, but all that is, I mean, he wants us to want to know him and to seek him. And if there's no mystery, there's no reason to
Yeah.
seek.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
I do know what you mean. If there's no mystery, there's no reason to seek. That should be the title of your next book.
Hey, there you
Uh,
go.
wow. And in fact, like this is what I get excited about in that particular subject. Wonder and mystery. I, that is the only frequency my soul is actually tuned to. And
Mm-hmm.
I own and absolutely celebrate the privilege of the fact that I think my soul has only ever really known that. And I
Mm-hmm.
didn't grow up. My story is a different religious story, um, and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't grow up with church trauma or pain. I grew up with uh, a lack of any level of connection to the things that I was actually fascinated by, that my soul
Mm-hmm.
would be interested in. I was bored out of faith for decades, and then when I was reintroduced to mystery, when I was reintroduced to wonder and all the unknowable, I somehow fell deeply in love with that, and that's the only thing my soul chases. And so maybe that's why
Mm-hmm.
reading poetry like yours specifically, that doesn't, I let me offer, I don't think your poetry tries to answer questions. Your poetry simply speaks your truth and invites
Mm-hmm.
me, a reader, into it to consider what it might mean, and maybe to find
Right.
bits of
Mm-hmm.
myself in it, but certainly
Mm-hmm.
to understand uh, life from a different angle. And
Mm-hmm.
can I? So I part of the power of poetry is that it can contain some sharp edges, right? Uh, this book,
Yeah, I should put that on the cover.
warning,
Warning contains
warning,
sharp edges.
yeah. In this book, I think it cuts deep into power structures of institutions. It cuts deep into American culture. It certainly cuts deep into patriarchy as it manifests itself both inside and outside of the church. There's one poem, uh, one of several, that must have been so sensitive to put on paper. But I'm not going to ask you to talk about this whole poem or anything like that. But it ends with a few incredibly heavy lines. I'm gonna read these lines. Probably not the way that you would have read them, but
That's
um,
fine. It's
it
fine.
ends like this. Great news. This is all excusable if you have a penis. All you have to do is say, "I'm sorry." You don't even have to mean it. Let me ask you this: as a
Them's fighting
yeah,
words.
heck yeah, they are. Yeah. Uh, as a strong female voice in a rapidly changing Christian space, what do you want young women to hear as they walk their own faith journey inside a broken system that isn't designed to love them the way that God loves them? What do you
Mm.
want? What do you want? Rewind yourself a decade. What do you want yourself to
Mm.
hear in this collection?
God is for you. Um, this book is actually, so I'll tell you a little story. This book is actually very much a fulfillment of a picture that God gave me when I was still in a very broken church space, a space that did not have really room for my voice as a woman. didn't have room for poetry either because mystery was very scary. There was a lot of fear about being led astray and all that. And I had this picture in my head of Jesus and sharing with him all of these things that I wanted to offer people, ways I wanted to serve, And I had all my very acceptable things, such as cooking, baking, serving in children's ministry, all the things that were like accepted in that structure that I was in. And then over here I had writing more books, speaking, and I was like in my head, I did this during a spiritual direction meeting, I should say. So we were kind of prayerfully like holding these things together. And I had, I was like, Jesus, come over here. Like, don't you want me to do these things over here? The things that were acceptable in my church culture. And he was like, no, like, I want you to speak and to write. And I want you to tell women how much I love them. It was like such a clear direction. It was like, this is what you're supposed to do. And that is what I've attempted to do in this book. I mean, there's obviously so many more things I could say and will say over however many years God gives me on earth. But this book was the beginning of me saying, okay, we have to first call out what's messed up, because there's a lot of messed up stuff. And it's not even like I get to all of it. I just name some things. And that's what that poem does. Just being like, okay, calling out the fact that, I'm sorry is supposed to be good enough for the fact that, I was sexually abused. We're just supposed to say, oh, he's sorry, so now it's fine. So now we're all just going to go and pretend that nothing happened and my life has not been like irrevocably changed by this. No. That's not okay, actually. That's not Christian. That's not of God. That's not holy. But they mask it like it is. They act like it is. And so I had to first call out some of the ways that I really think patriarchy and misogyny are huge culprits of that. Like, obviously, there was a time when I thought, oh, well, we can isolate abuse in the church separate from those things, because I was in a very patriarchal place, and even still was very passionate about the church being freed from abusive people. But now I've started to see that those things are linked. They're very linked. And it has made the church in a sense of, patriarchal church, has become a safe haven for abusers. Because all they have to do is say, I'm sorry, and they don't even have to mean it. They can just be safe there. And as long as they're male, like, they're fine. It's like, the women will always be the ones that have to leave. So I would want to say to myself and to any woman listening, God values you. And he values you way more than the people at your church do. I mean, I hope that the people at your church actually value you the way that God does, but I have not seen a lot of that. I'm sure there are places where it's happening, and I'm hoping to maybe be part of one of those places someday. But God loves you. And if people are not treating you in a loving way at church, and they're gaslighting you and telling you that, oh, it's all fine because we just have to preserve unity or whatever, leave. Because that's not, God wants more for you than that. There's a better way.
I'd love to dive deeply into every single poem, but that's probably, first of all, not going to sell many books if we just read them all on this podcast. But
I know, right?
I also, so there's one other poem I'd maybe like to use as a prompt for conversation. It includes this line, and I think it follows what you just said very well. It includes this line: I am small, but I am not powerless. Grace, would you be open to reading that poem for us? And maybe I've got a
Hmm.
question maybe to ask at the end of that, but I'd love to hear that from you.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. On days when I wake up to murder in the news, I open the curtains and let in the light. I kiss the toddlers on their foreheads and I teach them to be kind. I take ripe tomatoes and gently peel their skins, mixing them with jalapenos and onions, spices and vinegar, a salsa we'll enjoy all winter long. And I say a prayer, and I shed some tears, and I write this poem. What else can I do in the face of heinous evil but affirm the beauty of life and let in the light? I am small, but I am not powerless.
What else can I do in the face of heinous evil? That is such a relevant line for the things that many people have been through. It's such a relevant line for the
Yes.
times that we live in, for us turning on the news on any given morning. You wrote about making salsa, praying, crying, and writing. If if I write that poem, I think I'd write about similar things, and then maybe I'd write about going to a coffee shop to talk with an old friend or a new connection. What else can I do in the face of all that's happening in the world, in the face of all this heinous evil? Do you think do you think writing poems for each other and talking with each other about the heinous evil we see around us, do you think that can matter? Like, is that a way for us to get through these times that feel really heavy? Is that an underutilized tool that maybe we should be experimenting with somehow,
Talking about the evil
or
more
writing poems about it?
or writing poems more? I think, yeah. So for me, this poem is a poem about balance. Because as you said, we have to talk about the things, but we also have to let in the light. And I think, yeah, absolutely writing a poem is a way to let in the light, and is also a way to name the evil. Um, I think that when we connect over poems, we're able to see that our experiences are more universal than we thought, um, which doesn't make them less challenging, but does help us feel less alone. And I think for me, poems are the way to let into the light, to say, obviously in that poem, to say, me teaching my toddlers to be kind is an act of radical resistance, right? Making salsa and gently peeling these tomato skins. Like in a world where bombs are falling on families, and it's so evil and it's so dark and it should not be happening. I'm standing in my kitchen at the same time, gently peeling the skin off a tomato. And that says to me, there is still gentleness in this world. We are capable of both. We're capable of horrible evil, and we're also capable of gentleness and kindness and beauty. And it is up to us to steward our peace and to do our part to let in the light. Can that change the world? I don't know. I hope so. I think so. I think that if everybody on planet Earth decided to let in the light instead of blowing each other up, man, it'd be a different place. No, that sounds really reductionist, but I know there's a lot of complexity and nuance to that. But um, as an empath, I very easily get overwhelmed with all of the evil I see. So it's important for me to ground myself in the fact that making salsa can matter and teaching my toddlers to be kind can matter. And I can't just get so overwhelmed that I am paralyzed from doing the good that I'm supposed to do in my part of the world.
I'm looking at the clock and I'm realizing we're nearing the end of our time together, Grace. And so maybe here's what I want to do. Two things. Number two is ask you to close with a poem of your choice from, I'm guessing it'll be from this new book, but I don't know, whatever. I would love to just have your art be the last thing that people hear on this episode. But before we do that, I wanted to maybe ask you, like, where can people pre-order this book right now? Where should we find you? I am subscribed to your Substack, yes, like, or to your newsletter, which, by the way, today will be, many days ago by the time people listen to this, but today you wrote about this kind of, what can we do in this moment? Yeah. I forget the words you used, but it struck me this morning that what is mine to do? That was yes. And it was a beautiful reflection on this question of maybe it's not much, but this is in front of me right now. This is the tomato I can peel gently in my kitchen. And each of us has that. Anyway, sorry. Where can people find you? How do we buy your stuff?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, my books are for sale. Daughter of Breath is up for pre-order. The paperback pre-orders are not on Amazon and everywhere else yet, but they will be soon. They probably will be, actually, by the time this podcast airs. The ebook pre-orders are on Amazon. The paperback pre-orders for US are also available on my website now and will be up and through the launch. And if you are in the US, I highly encourage you to buy it from my website, because then you will get fun stickers and all kinds of like little goodies. There's a cute bookmark that I just made. Anyway, so there's gonna be fun little goodies for the people that pre-order through my website, and your copy will be signed too, which is fun. But yeah, the pre-orders will be everywhere. The paperback pre-order will be available everywhere very soon. As the Sparrow Flies is up everywhere on my website, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the places. You can ask your indie bookstore to order it. It's on bookshop.org. It's everywhere. And where can you find me? I mean, graceekelley.substack.com. We'll put that in the
show notes, yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The show notes. That's it. Sorry, I had a toddler in my bed with me last night, so I'm going to blame it on that, because I didn't sleep super great and my brain's not 100% today. And then, yeah, I mean, you can find me on social media too, at Gracie Kelley Writes. But Substack's the best place to connect with me, for sure. So,
well, will you close us out with maybe sharing a poetry shaped piece of art with us? And
I will.
Tell us about it. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. This is a short one. All right. I know you have sometimes wished to be smaller, to tuck yourself in tidy origami folds so you could fit, just so, inside their front breast pocket. But you have always been more than a colorful scrap of satin, and I'm here to tell you, that is no life for you.
Thank you, Grace.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.